Hello everyone, my name is Anya Kuba and I'm a professional software developer, YouTuber, and your host for this 12-hour plus YouTube coding bootcamp. Now, what exactly makes this a YouTube coding bootcamp, you may ask? And why the 12 hours plus? Well, this course has been specifically built out making the most of YouTube's functionality in order to help you on your coding journey. What I mean by this is a video bootcamp which will very much take the form of a part 1, being you coding along with me in the video, part 2 being me presenting you with some exercises and challenges that you should attempt by yourself before we go through the answer together. And 3, at the end of each major section, I will be directing you to a project I think would be suitable for you to try with the knowledge you have gained so far. This is going to be an external video on my channel. So I will be directing you to the video I suggest via a YouTube card at the right moment in time. This is also why we are calling it a 12-hour plus video, as the learning content that you will be exposed to on your bootcamp journey will amount to the bootcamp itself and 6 suggested external projects to put in your developer portfolio. Now, I am not going to sugarcoat it. Coding can be hard. To get your mind thinking like a developer takes practice and a lot of repetition. To help us do this, I have incorporated that repetition into each section by providing you with questions and tasks to complete. This is why I cannot stress that the best way for you to learn is to get on your laptop and code along with me, and not just take notes. I find that learning code is always better done by doing. Okay, so what exactly are we going to learn on this coding bootcamp? Let's break it down. In the first section, we are going to start off with HTML, so the language that describes the structure of a web page. We will then move on to CSS, or cascading style sheets. This describes how HTML elements are to be displayed, and finally move on to JavaScript. Most of our time will be focused on JavaScript, as there really is a lot to learn with this language. This is where I will be focusing most of my energy by providing you with some fun lessons accompanied by some exercises and projects. I like to make the lessons very visual to break away from the generic teaching patterns we so often see in software development. Here are just a few examples of what you will see on this course. This, of course, is a free course, and I will be providing you all the necessary documentation and links in the description below, as well as a breakdown of all our lessons and where you can find them in this video thanks to YouTube timestamps. You can see a full list of what we're going to learn if you click on the expand button below. So go ahead and do that. This course has been a while in the making and is available to everyone and anyone right here on my channel. I really do believe that anyone should have the opportunity to learn how to code, which is why this course is free and will always be free. So, what are we waiting for? Let's do it. Don't forget to click and subscribe if you enjoyed this course, and I look forward to having you on board. Okay, so let's jump right to it. First off, I want to have a quick discussion about how we're actually going to be writing our code. To write our code, we are going to be using a code editor. Now, there are many choices for you to choose from. I have chosen 4 that I have used in the past. In no particular order, we've got Playcode, CodePen, JS Fiddle, and Code Sandbox. These are all online editors for us to get started straight away. For no other reason than for me having to choose one, I'm going to be using Code Sandbox for this course. This means that the editor that you will be seeing in this video will be Code Sandbox. However, you are absolutely free to use any of the other 3 or find your own, because what is important is the file structure. It is also important to note that you can have a code editor directly on your laptop. This is something that we're going to be doing towards the end of the course. 2 options that come to mind are Visual Studio and Atom. Okay, so here is a recap of all the code editors available to you. Please have a go at using all of them, see which one fits you best, or otherwise, let's get going with Code Sandbox. Okay, so let's get started. Now, In whatever code editor you have chosen, please go ahead and make an index.html file in the root of your project. This would literally involve you creating a file and calling it index with the extension HTML, so your code editor knows to make this an HTML file. If this has worked, you will see an icon pop up to the left. It might be that your code editor has some other files as well. For example, Code Sandbox has this package.json. This is because it's an online code editor, so it needs a couple of extra files to get us started. If you are struggling getting to this point, don't worry. Go to the description below where I provided you with a link in order to get started. That link will provide you with this setup that you see right here. Okay, so once you are comfortable and have your code editor of choice set up with an index.html file in the root of your project, let's carry on. But before we get right into any code at all, what exactly is HTML? Hypertext Markup Language, or HTML, is regarded to be a comparatively simple language, which is great. HTML is the standard markup language for documents designed to be displayed in a browser. But what do I mean by markup language? In computer text processing, a markup language is a system of annotating a document in a way that is syntactically distinguishable from text. Meaning when the document is processed for display, the markup language is not shown and is only used to format the text. So for example, here we have used the bold tags to make the text in between the two tags appear to be bold when viewed in the browser. The idea and the terminology evolved from the markup of paper manuscripts, for example, the revision instructions by editors, which is traditionally written with a red pen or blue pencil on authors' manuscripts. Such markup typically includes both content corrections, such as spelling, punctuation, or movement of content, and also typographic instructions, such as to make a heading larger or boldface. Web browsers receive HTML documents from a web server or from local storage and render the documents into multimedia web pages. HTML describes the structure of a web page semantically and originally includes cues for the appearance of the document. HTML elements are the building blocks of HTML pages. With HTML constructs, images, and other objects such as interactive forms may be embedded into the render page. HTML provides a means to create structured documents by denoting structural semantics for text such as headings, paragraphs, lists, links, quotes, and other items. HTML elements are defined by tags written using angle brackets, such as this. This is an opening tag. Most opening tags have to be accompanied by a closing tag in order for this to become an element. So for example, here we have the tags to make text bold. Browsers do not, however, display the HTML tags, but use them to interpret the content of the page. But enough chat, let's get to seeing some code. It is important to note that for this course, we're going to be using the latest version of HTML, and that is HTML5 standard. Here is the basic file structure for when working with an HTML file. As you can see here, I've gone ahead and created an index.html file. So I've called the file index, and by giving it the HTML extension, my code editor knows to treat this as an HTML file. The first tag I want to show you is right here. So that's the tag. It is a tag that tells the browser that this is an HTML5 document. As mentioned, there are previous older versions of HTML, so just be aware of that on your journey as a web developer. The browser needs to know what version of HTML the document is in order to render it correctly. Next, we tell the browser where our HTML is starting. We do this as even though we only have HTML in here for now, we can actually write CSS and JavaScript in this document too. Something that I will show you later down the line in this course. We're going to be using this HTML opening tag and closing tag as the root of our document. Everything else that we want to get picked up by the browser has to live inside it. Next, we have the head tag and closing tag. This is where we store information mainly.
This is not to be confused with a header. The head will store information that is not visible in the browser. It's for storing and not displaying. Next, we have our title tag. This is for naming our project. We do this so we can store what we want to call the project that we are working on and store this in the head. So make sure it is in between the opening tag and the closing tag of the head. Once again, this is not a title that we will see in our browser. However, if you look at the tab of the browser your project is in, you should be able to see it. It will also show up in search results, so for example in Google. Next, we have the body itself. Now, this is where the visible stuff will be. This is essentially where we are going to start coding out our web page. So let's get to it. First up, I'm going to talk to you about text first. We have loads of different headers in HTML. We can start with an H1 header, so that being our largest header, hello, and this can go all the way down to H6. So if I just go ahead and change these like so, got an H2, H3, H4, H5, and an H6. Okay, we'll save that and open up our browser. So you will see here now all the headers in chronological order. There is nothing past H6, so I can even put an H7 tag like so. Hi. And you will see here that it just doesn't get applied. This is just standard non-formatted text. So that covers the headers. We can also do paragraphs. So this is what a paragraph tag would look like. I am a paragraph. And there we go. Unlike headers, paragraphs do not have a hierarchy. It is simply just this. Next up, let's make some text show up in bold. So we have two ways of doing this. I can do this either with a B tag. So similar to here, I'm just going to do it on the paragraph, put in a tag and a closing tag of the parts that I want to make bold. So for example, here I made the whole paragraph bold, or I can simply make one part of it bold. So in this example, I've chosen the I, or I can use the strong tag. Now there is one major difference in this. What is interesting about the strong tag is that it also has semantic meaning to the browser, meaning that the browser will read this text as more important than the rest. Now we also have the EM tag. So I'm just going to use it here so you can see what it does first. And then closing tag. This tag has what you call it stress emphasis. In the browser, it will make your text appear italic. And once again, it will tell the browser that we should be stressing this word also. So it has semantic meaning. So to recap, both of these, the strong and the EM tag, have semantic meaning. And they are also inline elements. What this means is that an inline element does not start on a new line and only takes up as much width as necessary. This is opposed to a block element, which we will cover in a bit. Before we move on, however, I just want to cover two more tags that are relevant for text. The first is the A tag. This A tag, so this one right here, which I'll do it up here, right, an A tag. This A tag is short for anchor, and we can use it to link a location within the file or link the tag to a completely different web page. So here I have written an A tag. I'm just going to put the words GitHub, then my GitHub page. Now, what I want to happen is that when someone clicks this word right here, so GitHub, or to be precise, the word in the anchor tag, I want them to be taken to my GitHub page, which is online. At the moment, nothing is happening. This is because we haven't finished our anchor tag yet. We need to give it an attribute. Many elements can take attributes, Attributes are stored in the opening tag, so right in here, and give extra information to the browser. In the case of the anchor tag, I want to give it the location of where I want the user to be taken if they click on the element. This is how the href, which is the attribute that I need to give my a tag, will look. I would simply write href equals and the full or absolute path to my GitHub page. This will look like so. I'm just going to move that out a little bit for us to see. Now, what I mean by absolute path is that it is the full path to what you are linking to. So for example, I would have to include the HTTP or HTTPS part of the URL. Just putting www will not do. At the moment, this might seem obvious. However, when you start linking to pages in your projects, you will start dealing with relative paths too. So here we have an example. In the first example, you will see me linking the a tag to a relative path. So a file called about.html in the same directory as the file we are in. And then below, you will see me linking the a tag to an external website by providing the absolute path to the web page. Let me show you this with an example. I'm going to create a page. So I'm going to just go here and call this about.html. So we have that page here. There's nothing in it yet. Now, in my index.html, let's say that instead of linking to my GitHub page, I want to link to my about page. Let's do this here in the h3 tag. And I'm just going to change this from an h3 to an a tag and give it an href attribute in which I'm going to give the relative path to my about page. So simply put that. If I now click on here, it will take me to my about page. If, however, I want to link to a file that is in a folder, so let's go ahead and create a folder. I'm going to call it details. I'm going to put my about file into that folder. Now I'm going to have to go into that folder and then get the about page. So that is the syntax for doing that. I'm going into the folder called details and then I'm getting the about page. Great. Okay, it is now time to use everything we have learned so far in the HTML section in order to build our first project. This project is going to be an online portfolio. The portfolio itself will be built out in HTML and CSS. We will be implementing a little bit of JavaScript towards the end of our course as well, so make sure to save this project as you go. Okay, let's do it. Online portfolio project coming up next. I'm going to delete the text in here. So we're ready for the next section. So we have just learned about inline elements in HTML. If you are curious as to how many inline elements there are out there, here is a complete list for you. We have only gone over a few, however, there are a lot more to go. I don't feel we need to go into each and every single one of them. I have used the most popular ones and I'm going to teach you a few more as this course goes on. Now, let's have a look at the block level elements. Here is a full list of all the block level elements that are available to you. You might already be familiar with some, as we've already discussed H1, H2, H3, 4, 5, and 6 tags, as well as the paragraph tag. However, the one that I think is the most important for the next part of this course is going to be the div tag. The HTML content division element, or the div, is the generic container for flow content. It has no effect on the content or layout until styled in some way using CSS. As a pure container, the div element does not inherently represent anything. Instead, it's used to group content so it can be easily styled using the class or ID attributes. Let's go through this in an example. So in here, I'm going to create my first div element. I'm going to give it an opening tag and a closing tag. As mentioned in the slide, we would usually use a class attribute, so similar to something like this, and then call it container, so we can style it up in the CSS, or similarly we can use an ID too. To get to grips with these two concepts of IDs and classes, we need to start talking about CSS. Let's do that in the next lesson.
Okay, so we have made it to the end of the HTML section. As mentioned, there really are a lot of HTML elements that exist in HTML, and while we did not cover all of them, we did cover the most popular ones. As we move on in the course, I will be introducing new HTML elements to you, as well as showing you how to style them. We will be doing this with the help of CSS. So, saying that, the CSS section is up next. Once again, as a reminder, please do code along with me in your IDE of choice. I have provided some templates for you below in the description if you need help on the setup or if you get stuck through the next section. So please refer to the description below to grab that template now. It will have a timestamp next to it to make it clearer as to which one you should use at this point in time. Now, let's get to it.
Cascading Style Sheets, or CSS, is a style sheet language used for describing the presentation of a document written in a markup language such as HTML. CSS is a cornerstone technology of the World Wide Web, alongside HTML and JavaScript. CSS is designed to enable the separation of presentation and content, including layout, colors, and fonts. This separation of presentation characteristics enable multiple web pages to share formatting by specifying the relevant CSS in a separate .css file, which reduces complexity and repetition in the structural content, as well as enabling the CSS file to be cached to improve the page load speed between the pages that share the file and its formatting. Separation of formatting and content also makes it feasible to present the same markup page in different styles for different rendering methods, such as on-screen, in print, by voice, and on Braille. The name cascading comes from the specify priority scheme to determine which style rule applies if more than one rule matches a particular element. Don't worry if all of that went over your head. We're going to be going through this with examples now. One way of adding CSS to your div would be to add the style attribute to your opening tag. So to do this, I would simply add the style attribute like so, and equals, and then in quotation marks, I would set the property of width. So I'm not making this up, this is a CSS property. And then I would put the width in pixels, so px for pixels, and then end it with a semicolon. When we get inside these quotation marks, we are no longer writing HTML, we are writing CSS. So we've got our width. Let's also set a height. So I'm going to say height 200 pixels, semicolon, and a background color of green. Save. And there we have it. We have successfully styled our first div. Now this is great. However, as you can imagine, you don't really want to be writing all of your CSS in the HTML file. It could be very unmanageable and get very messy. To solve this problem, we're going to store all our CSS in one file. Let's do that in the next section. So the first thing that I'm going to do is, as mentioned, separate my style from my HTML page and create a new file, which I'm going to choose to call styles CSS. So I am telling my code editor that this is now a cascading style sheet by this extension like so. The next thing we actually need to do is link up our style sheet to our index HTML file. I'm going to do this with the link tag. So this is a HTML tag that will allow us to link our style sheet to our HTML file. I'm going to do this above the header up here. So link, then pass through style sheet, and add the href. So I'm linking the styles CSS document that I've written here. Make sure that it matches correctly, otherwise this will not work. Okay, now to separating it. So I'm essentially going to get all of this in here. So as we said, everything inside these quotation marks is considered to be CSS. So let's go ahead and cut that out. I also don't need the style attribute anymore. So I'm going to close that. Now, as we want to apply styling to the div, I'm going to have to somehow tell my style sheet that that's what I want to style. I could do this like so. I would grab the div, open up some curly braces, and paste everything that I had previously. And you will see our rectangle is back up. Our div is once again styled. Now, to make this look a little bit neater and more readable, it is common to have this layout when it comes to CSS. Let's save this file and let's carry on. So we have styled our first div. However, what if I want to create another div? So let's just go ahead and paste another div here and press save. You will see that another div has been made with the exact same styling that we have seen here. We have two divs with the exact same styling. This is great when it comes to not having to repeat ourselves and style something over and over again like we would have had to in the HTML if it looked like this. So we would have had to have that, and once again this, and so on and so on and so on. Thanks to our style sheet, we don't have to do that anymore. So I'm just going to get rid of that again. Great. Let's put in our second div and save. Now, as divs are considered to be the building blocks of HTML, perhaps I don't want all my divs to look like this. Now, one option will be to use another block element, such as a section, and give the section some styling that is similar but not exactly the same as a div. So I'm just going to change the color in this case for now. So there we go, we've got a div, and a section. However, you will find that you'll soon run out of elements to use. This is why we have classes and IDs. I'm going to show you this now. In this next section, we're going to have a close look at classes and IDs and use cases for both. Let's get to it. So here we have two divs. Let's say I want the second div to have styling that is different from this div. I could easily give it a class, and let's call this one the About Me class. And let's go in here. Now, to get this class right here, I would have to use a different type of syntax. To denote a class, I would have to use a dot in my style sheet. Okay, so by writing dot, I am telling this file that I need to look for the class of About Me. Now, I can give this a background color of blue. And there we go. The div with the class of About Me is now blue. What you might notice, however, is how the About Me div still has the styling from this div right here. So it is still 300 pixels wide and 200 pixels, even though we didn't tell it to be those dimensions right here. That is because we are essentially adding on top of the styling that it already has. So we are overriding the background color green with the background color blue. If you wanted this div to be completely separate from the styling that it has here, we would have to remove the styling from the div element itself. So we could do so like this, by giving this a class that is separate. So I'm going to call this class header. This is not correct. We will change this, but it's just to show you for now. So in here, I would go dot header, And there we go. The About Me has now disappeared because we have not given it a width and a height. Let's fix that. Width, 300 pixels, height, 100 pixels. And there we go. Now let's go back to here. You will notice that I used a div with the class of header. This is not really correct. We should not be doing this as we already have an element that is specifically a header. So let's go ahead and use that. There we go. And now we don't want this to be a class anymore. We just want this to be the element. So let's delete that too. We can also do the same for a footer, as there is already a pre-existing element for us. So there we go. Okay, now it's time for a quick pop quiz. Let's do it. Here you have your index.html file. All it has in it is a body with a background color of light coral. So I've applied styling in the HTML file to give the body a background color of light coral. Now, based on everything you have learned so far, how do you think that you would add a circle element to the body? Okay? Have a go at this yourself. All I want is a circle. I want the circle to be any color you want and any size. Please put that in to the browser here so it's visible for us. Please style it up as you wish. I'm going to pause here while you have a go at doing this. Please have fun. If you don't get it, that's absolutely fine because we're going to be going through the answer together. See you in a bit. Okay, so I would do it like this. I would open up our body because the div has to be a child of the body. I would then go ahead and put a div. I would style it to give it a background color, and let's make it light sea green. We won't be able to see anything if we refresh our page because we haven't given this a width or a size or a height. So I'm going to go ahead and it has to be in here. Give it a width of 100 pixels and a height of 100 pixels. I'm just going to get rid of this for now so we can see everything. Okay, so we have a square, and the one last thing that I will need to do is I'm actually going to give it something called a border radius. I'll give it 50 pixels. And there we go. We have now created a circle in our body. I hope that was fun. Don't worry if you didn't get it. That's what I'm here for. We're going to be going through the answers together. And please feel free to use the internet if you ever get stuck. That is absolutely fine too. Now, I want you to essentially add a style sheet to what you've done so far so that we can take out the style and put it into a separate file or our style sheet. So just like we did in the lessons, I'm going to pause here. So I'm going to open up this as well because you will be needing to add files and some structure. Please have a go and do this first. Feel free to use what you've learned before. As a hint, you will have to link up your style sheet and add the styling into the style sheet. Have fun. I'll see you soon. Okay, so the way I would do this is this. First off, we actually need to link our style sheet to our index.html file. So let's go ahead and create it first. I'm just going to write styles CSS. So I'm giving the file the CSS file extension to tell our IDE that this is a CSS file. If I click enter, you will see a little icon show up to see that that has worked. Next up, I would actually need to link this file to my index.html file. So I'm going to do it in the head, and I'm simply going to write a link. I'm going to make it a self-closing link. I'm going to add the href, go to the styles CSS file, and I'm also going to tell my IDE that this is a style sheet for good measure. Okay, so now we've linked our style sheet, we've created a file. I'm actually now going to take all of this styling, so I'm literally just going to cut it out. We don't need this style anymore because we're literally going to put it in here. Now the next thing we need to do is actually add all of this to the div. So I'm going to pick out my div by giving a class of circle. And then I'm going to grab that class, because it's a class name, we need a dot and the word class, and just put all of this in here, like so. I'm also going to get rid of this. Oops, we wrote class, I meant to write circle. And get the body, so this time I'm not telling it it's a class, I'm just grabbing the element of body itself. And once again, pasting what we had before, like so. And we have done it. We have recreated what we have written previously by taking out the styles from our index.html file. So all our styles are now in a separate file, okay? So hopefully you see that there is no styling in here anymore. We just have a body and a div with a class of circle. And in here, we have the body element, which is styled, and the class of circle. So anything with the class of circle will have this styling. Okay, so I hope you've enjoyed this pop quiz. If you didn't get it, that's absolutely fine. If you had to rewind and look at a lesson again, or perhaps use the internet, that is totally fine. That is absolutely normal as a software developer. We'll be doing a lot of these quizzes and a lot of these challenges, so I hope you enjoyed this one. Let's carry on. Okay, so you've just seen me use 3 CSS properties. That is the width, where we set the width with the pixels, the height, where we set the height with the pixels, background color, where we set it to blue, and I also like to use border and border radius. These are my 5 most used CSS properties, I would say. If you look at the border, you can see that it takes 3 values. If I want the border to be solid, then I put solid, and then I choose a color, and then I choose the border width. And the border radius is something that allows me to soften the edges of a rectangle. It is also what I would use to create circles. We will be using all of these in our project. Before we move on, I just want to show you what I mean when I talk about border. In this next section, we're going to look at the box model. Here we have our div. I have named it here as content in purple. Our div also has a padding. So you can access the padding by the padding CSS property, and then you will see the border. The border is just above the padding. And lastly, above the border, you will have a property called a margin. So all divs possess all of these 3 properties, and we can use them to our advantage. Let's go back to our style sheet. So let's take the about me. So as a reminder, the about me is a div with the class of about me. If I add a margin to it, so I'm going to add margin 10 pixels, you'll see the about me now has a margin of 10 pixels here, 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 and here. If we change this to padding, our div now has a padding, so an inner padding of 10 pixels from the actual div itself. Just gonna switch that back to margin. I'm also gonna add a border. So once again, I want a solid border. Let's make it black. And then it already has a default width, but I'm just gonna change that to 10 pixels and click save. One other thing that I did mention is the border radius. And I'm just gonna choose 15 pixels. And now you'll see that our div has softened edges because we've applied a border radius. So that is just some of the properties that are available to me in CSS. There are quite a lot out there, but for the purpose of this course, I'm going to be using the most popular ones. Now, the next thing I want to talk to you about is colors. In this next section, let's talk a little bit about colors. Hex colors are a way of representing colors from various color models through hexadecimal values. A hexadecimal color follows the format RR, GG, BB. This is where RR is red, GG is green, and BB is blue. These hexadecimal integers can be in a range of 00 to FF to specify the intensity of the color. This hex color, for example, represents black, and this one represents white. A simpler example of this is this one right here. This color is pure red because the red component is at its max value of FF, and the green and the blue components are at their lowest of OO. However, when you get into the design aspect of things and people really want to customize their colors, you're more likely to see something like this. Using hex color codes to represent different colors is an easy way to differentiate between colors. Once you understand how they work, you can easily change the red, blue, or green values to create a different shade. This is particularly convenient given that you have such a range of color options with hex color codes, which guarantees color exactness. We also have the RGB color model. The RGB color model is an additive color model in which red, green, and blue light are added together in various ways to reproduce a broad array of colors. The name of the model comes from the initials of the three additive primary colors, red, green, and blue. The main purpose of the RGB color model is for the sensing, representation, and display of images in electronic systems such as televisions and computers, though it has also been used in conventional photography. Before the electronic age, the RGB color model already had a solid theory behind it, based on human perception of colors. RGB is a device-dependent color model. Different devices detect or reproduce a given RGB value differently. This is because color elements such as phosphors or dyes and their response to their individual RGB levels vary from manufacturer to manufacturer, or even in the same device over time. What is great about the RGB model is that we can also add a level of transparency. So here by the 0.5 we are indicating that this color, we want it to be at 50% opacity. I'm going to show you this with an example. It is absolutely your choice what you'd rather use, if you'd rather use the preset colors that we have already here, whether you'd rather use the RGB or the hex. For here, I'm just going to choose to change this. So I'm going to change it from background to RGB, and then don't forget our semicolon. So we've just changed this to this sort of browny red color. And now if I want to make it transparent by 50%, I would simply add 0.5. I can change the level of transparency, so I can make it super transparent or less transparent if I wish. Same for the hex. So with hex colors, it is a little bit different. We don't write RGB in front or hex. We simply get the hash like so, and then get our 6 numbers and letters to represent the color that we want. With some code editor tools, it is possible to click on the actual color itself and just choose from the selector right here also. So for example, similarly to that. So that is 3 ways of adding colors in CSS. You could either choose the default colors, choose your own RGB color, or choose a hex color. The choice is totally up to you. Now, let's go back to building our page. Just going to save this for now. So we have our header, which currently doesn't have anything in it. It is just a header that is purple. We have a div with the about me, which is here, and we have a section, which is blue. Lastly, we also have a footer, which currently doesn't have anything. As this is a portfolio page for myself, I want my footer to contain some information. I want to put this information in a list. Let's learn a little bit about lists now. Using just HTML, we can make 2 different types of lists. An ordered list, so with numbers, and an unordered list, so just with bullet points or similar. I'm going to show you how to do this now. So in my footer, I've decided that I want a table of content. Let's do this first with an ordered list. So I would use the OL tag for this, OL for ordered list. I'd make an opening tag and then a closing tag. So you won't actually be able to see anything for now. It's not until we start adding list items as denoted by the LI tag. So once again, an opening tag and a closing tag until we can see things. So my first list item is going to have an about me section. So if I click save, you will see a list item that is ordered. By ordered, I mean it has the number 1. I'm just going to make the height of the section here smaller so you can see it, and make our header 50 pixels high as well. So let's have an about me, a contacts page where we're going to have a form and a link to my GitHub. If I wanted to change the starting number of my ordered list, I would simply add an attribute of start to it and pass through the number 50 like so. So now my ordered list starts from the number 50. However, I decided that I don't actually want an ordered list at all. I want an unordered list. That makes a lot more sense in regards to what I want to try achieve. The bullet is a default that gets given with the UL tag. If you want to style this up in a different way, we're going to have to use CSS. For example, I'm just going to put the styling in the HTML file just for now, and I could do something like this, list style type, and then pass through a square. So now we get little squares instead of bullet points. I can also have the type be a disk, and of course a circle. Other things that I can do to style my list, I'm going to do it in the HTML file rather than the style sheet for now, just so I can show you quickly. And that is change the line height. So I'm just going to pass through a line height of 100 pixels. So that's what it will look like more spaced out, 10 pixels, and so on and so on. I can actually also use percentages for this. So I know we've been using pixels quite a lot, but if we want to use percentages, that is absolutely fine too. Similarly to here, instead of having the width be 300 pixels, I can actually use my browser width to decide on the height, to decide on the width of my elements. So here you will see my header width is now 50% of the browser. If I extend this, you will see that moves around with it. It is now responsive. I'm just going to get rid of this for now because I'm happy with the default height, and we'll style this out a little bit later. One thing that I'm also going to want to do that we have learned already is actually link these up with our anchor tags. So let's go ahead and do that now. We don't actually have an about page built out yet, or a contact page, but there's no harm in just leaving this like so we don't forget to do it later. So once again, we need the href, and I'm going to put the absolute path to my GitHub page, so you already see that that has created an anchor link, which again we can style to our preference. For example, if I don't want a line there, I can get rid of that. If I want to change the font, if I want to change the color, if I want to have it change if I hover over it, that is something we can do. And once again here, I'm just going to leave it for now because we haven't written the page, so that is just a placeholder for us to remember to do that later. Okay, so we have our header, we have an about me div, we have a section, and we now have a footer. Now that we have lists down, I want to show you how to embed images into your project. There are two ways of doing this. I'm going to show you how. For this, I'm going to use my about me section. I'm going to open up our div. So what I am saying essentially is I want my image to be inside the div here. And I'm going to use an image tag like this. What is important about image tags is that they are self-closing. We don't need an opening and a closing tag. So you can use it like that or simply like this. It is up to you. The image tag needs two attributes. The source attribute, in which we provide the path to the image we want to embed, and the alt attribute. The alt attribute holds a text description of the image, which isn't mandatory but is incredibly useful for accessibility. Screen readers read this description out to their users so they know what the image means. Alt text is also displayed on the page if the image can't be loaded for some reason. For example, network errors, content blocking, or link corrupt. I would always advise to have an alt text. So for this one, I'm going to put Anya Kubo headshot. Now for the image. One way of adding an image into the image tag is to simply go on the internet and find an absolute path for the image you want. So for example, if I go to the internet, I find a hedgehog, I then copy image address, paste it up here, you will see there is an image, or a rather large image of a hedgehog, which then of course I can use CSS to change the sizing of. This is okay, however, it's probably not the best practice for projects such as this. I would advise to store any images you use in your project directory. So let's go ahead and do that now. So in my file structure, I'm going to create a new folder. I'm going to call it images, where I'm going to store all my images for this project. Now inside here, I'm actually going to upload a file. And it's going to be my avatar. We can store PNG files, JPEG files, it's totally up to you. So now we need the relative path. So I'm going to go into my images folder and I'm going to get the Anya. Make sure to type it out exactly as you see it. PNG file and click save. Great. Now I'm also going to style this image, so I can either choose to use the image tag and style it up. However, I'm not confident this will be the only image tag that I use. So I'm going to use a class to do this. I'm going to call this avatar like that. I then choose a dot because we are working with the class name. I go avatar and set a width 100 pixels for the image. Great. I'm also going to use border radius and give a border radius of 50 pixels to make my avatar look like a circle. Okay, so this is looking good. I have my first image. I'm just going to shut down that folder. Let's go back to our index.html file. You will see that this code editor has actually reformatted this for me to be more readable. So now my image tag consists of the class attribute, a source attribute with the relative path to my PNG file, and an alternative text, so it's more accessible. The next thing that I want to talk to you about is IDs. So we've already styled something by elements. So when we were grabbing elements such as the header and section, we've also used classes such as denoted by this dot, but we can also use IDs. Now, before we move on, I'm just going to explain a little bit more about this first. So for example, we can grab things by elements such as the div. We can add classes to elements and grab them in our CSS thanks to a dot. And we can add IDs to our elements and grab them in our CSS thanks to the hash. IDs and classes are essentially hooks. But what is the difference between them? Well, IDs are unique. Each element can have only one ID, and each page can have only one element with that ID. Now, this isn't just a good rule of thumb, this is something that's quite important. If you are a purely HTML and CSS person, the difference might not be evident, but when we start working with JavaScript, this will really make a difference. For one, your code will not pass validation if you use the same ID on more than one element. Validation should be important to us all, so that alone is important and a big one. Classes, however, are not unique. You can use the same class on multiple elements, so similar like we did with the divs. You can also use multiple classes on the same element. Any styling information that needs to be applied to multiple objects on a page should be done with a class. And one last thing, elements can have both. So for example, my div here can have a class of about me and then also an ID as well. This is, however, optional, but sometimes a very good idea to have. So I'm going to write a title here. So I'm going to choose to have an h2 tag, the closing tag, and I'm going to give an ID of name. In it, I'm going to have my name, so Anya Kubo, and hit save. This will not do anything for now. I can, however, style it, so I'm just going to show you what that would look like if I did. I would use the hash to get the div with the ID of name, and then I'm just going to choose color, not background color because we're working with text for this one, and I'm just going to choose blue and save. You will also note that because h2 tags and image tags are not in line, they display as block, they actually stack over each other and don't fit in my section anymore. I would ideally want my image element to float to the right. I'm going to show you how to do this with something called Flexbox. Before we move on, I just want to talk to you a little bit more about other properties we can assign elements in HTML. So for example, we have the data ID. Let's have a look at a few more in code. Okay, so as we know, we can have elements. So I'm just going to make a div here. So here's my first tag and my closing tag, and I can give it a class name. So for example, box, an ID, for example, main. And then I can also have dataset read-only properties as well. A dataset read-only property starts off like this. It is in fact a custom data attribute. What this means is that I can make up any word I want as long as it has data in front of it. So, as a recap, the attribute will begin with data and / and can have anything after it. I can have data ID, such as this. I can have a data user, such as Joe. I can have let's get rid of this for now, date of birth. It is completely and totally up to you. So that is just something to keep in mind, as we will be using data IDs for some of our projects and later on in our JavaScript course. So as long as you make a note of this, you should be fine. Let's carry on with our lesson. In this next section, we are going to be looking at Flexbox. Let's do it. Flexbox, or the Flexbox layout module, aims at providing a more efficient way to lay out, align, and distribute space among items in a container, even when their size is unknown. The main idea behind the Flex layout is to give the container the ability to alter its items' width or height to best fill the available space. A Flex container expands items to fill available free space or shrinks them to prevent overflow. Most importantly, the Flexbox layout is direction agnostic. This is opposed to the regular layouts that we have. While those work well for pages, they lack flexibility to support large or complex applications. Let's go over some basics and terminology. So here we have 3 child elements in yellow, in an orange